Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Barclays track session, which is talking about changing priorities for global and regional treasurers. So I'll introduce myself. I'm David Shinkins. I'm Managing Director of Global Cash Management and Foreign Exchange Sales for Barclays Corporate Banking. And I'll be joined today by a number of esteemed colleagues on this panel. So I'm joined by another colleague, Martin Runow, who's the Global Head of Payments and FX and Digital from Barclays. I'm also joined by Girish Viswanathan, who's the Group Treasurer at our Tayer Group. And also joined by Eugene de Souza, who's Head of Corporate Planning, Control and IS from Sony Middle East and Africa. As we can all imagine, over the last 18 months, we've had a series of challenges, as you can imagine, as we've gone through this pandemic. We've seen changes to supply chain, we've seen core challenges around cash flow, we've seen government bailouts taking place from a liquidity standpoint, we've seen volatile foreign exchange markets throughout the 18 months. All of which time, clearly, the role of a treasurer and the role of a chief financial officer have been particularly pertinent, given the level of uncertainty there has been in the overall markets. Today's panel is going to very much focus on those themes. It's going to talk very much to what have been the changes pre and post-pandemic. It's going to also talk about clearly the challenges, specifically for Eugene and also for Girish and how they've responded to those challenges. But also then really from Martin and my perspective very much around how the banks have responded during that 18 months. So if I just give you my own view first of all before I come to the panel. Clearly, I started the first point. Cash flow forecasting, cash flow surplus, and all challenges clearly around lending and cash flow have been a primary challenge for corporates, specifically in the last 18 months, given that uncertainty around the supply chains. Clearly, the real-time visibility of those cash pools, depending upon the treasury structure that corporates have in place, have become more pertinent. These were pertinent pre-pandemic, but of course became very, very pertinent as we went through the last 18 months. The other point I would also reference is the external market exposure. So when we think about how has the market changed and developed, given the level of uncertainty there has been around funding, it's been particularly important for corporates to stay very close to their banking partners, particularly from a debt capital markets and equity capital markets perspective, particularly from a fundraising standpoint. But also I would talk about that relationship, therefore, with their core lending institutions and core relationship banks. Maintaining that very close dialogue has really helped us all stay safe and in control throughout that last 18-month period. The final point I'd also touch on, clearly we're going through still further regulatory change, as seems to be a consistent theme, these ACT events and conferences. So whether it's the introduction of the ISO 20022 standards, we've seen the LIBOR reform coming through. We're also seeing now clearly the introduction of SEPA and other payment schemes and methods, particularly in Europe. And then also specifically, if we think about the national payment system strategy that's been developed in the UAE and across the GCC region, you can start to see that despite what's been going on around in the world, there still continues to be innovation and regulatory change that's taking place. So an exciting time, clearly, but first of all, I'm going to start to hear from some of my other panelists to get their perspective. So really, Girish, from your perspective, can you talk to me a little bit about your priorities as a treasurer? Did the points I talked about earlier resonate? And also specifically for the UAE, how did this change as a result of COVID?
Okay, thank you, David. No, actually, I will just go one step ahead, like you discussed about cash. Actually, I will actually bifurcate into 4 broad heads, which is cash first, normal corporate treasures, forex, the relationship, and then we come to the technology. The cash, as far as cash is mentioned, each treasurers had different priorities during this pandemic time. Some of the treasurers, like me, who got diversified businesses, their priorities were different. Bankers used to view them in a different way. But the treasurers, who are in the one-line business, and especially with a red flag tag to the business, those treasurers were having tough time with the cash. Otherwise, and again, this part of the world, there was a lot of support from the central bank, which again gave a lot of support to the other banks to pass on the support to local conglomerates and local businesses. So that was really helpful. So from my angle, personal angle, there was not a major challenge as far as cash is concerned. And market was flooded with liquidity. Bankers, of course, they were very, very careful about how to choose their customers. So those was the challenge which the bankers were facing. But most of the customers with the business, what they used to manage, they were not having really major problems. Coming to Forex, Forex, it's never a problem for a treasurer, because the volatility and other things what we see in the market, that was always there, and we get used to those things. You have hedging techniques in place. Of course, you have all of a sudden spikes in the market based on some COVID related numbers, but as a seasoned treasurer, everybody will be used to it, and you have a hedging policy in place. So for me, that's not a major change. I'm just comparing the pre-pandemic and the pandemic stage. Absolutely, I'm just making myself clear. Then we come to the relationship management. This is a place, where for me, I take it very positively, actually, because with all the Teams and Zoom coming in, which was not there before pandemic, used to once in a while, it was all of a sudden Teams and Zoom. And to be very honest, I've done more meetings during the pandemic times than what I had done before the pandemic. The relationship actually was doing much, much better. And it was so good rather than doing on the phone, doing have a face and the video. So it was doing quite well. The relationship, and it was always an open understanding with the bank. As long as you're transparent with your bankers, you tell them this is your problem, this is what you foresee, these are the adjustments that you need to make. Most of the bankers in this part of the world had real empathy towards the business. So that was a major good thing. I'm talking especially on Middle East, focusing on UAE, KSA, Kuwait, and other sort of area. The major changes, what I noticed, was in the technology. Technology, of course, for both the side, from the banking also. This part of the world, actually, none of the companies are fully automated. So we have a lot of manual processes and other things in place. And I have seen a lot of bankers pushing back, rather really penalizing all the customers. You better start doing automation, otherwise, we are going to charge. So there was a lot of push. And as a result, I can see the level of automation, what it was around 50 to 60%, most of the companies would have gone to 70, 75%. 100% automation is a very, very highly, a desirable thing, but, it's never practically possible. I think any part of the world is not very practically possible. And coming to the digitalization, other thing what I had noticed it, for the companies, they quickly jumped into the bandwagon of digital marketing and digital selling. Many of the companies who have got retail customers, they immediately went digital, and they started shopping online. So a lot of challenges relating to payment gateways, payment service providers came in, which was the case before pandemic, but it was not that big. And this particular space, according to me, is the go thing for the treasurers for the future. I've been in this line for 30 years, but never could understand it fully. But this is going to be the major space. And again, a lot of automation happening, a lot of artificial intelligence coming there. When you talk to most of the people, you are always talking to a machine, either audio bot or a video bot. So sometimes it is insane, but this is the area where it is going to go leaps and bounds from here. Managing the payment gateways was tough, because all of a sudden we started getting into WhatsApp marketing. We started selling digitally everything, and dependency on MasterCard, Visa card, CyberSword, Mix. Then you got MADA, KNet. They are very, very complex. And added to this, the internal platforms. So this sort of arrangement was slightly tough for a treasurer, because treasurers normally they're used to this sort of a pooling mechanism. You have 940s in place, you've got good TMS, and you're taken care. But you need to step up now. You need to step up and to get to the other world, which is going to be much, much faster, progressing in a different bandwidth altogether.
Exactly, and exactly you're right there. No, thank you. It's an interesting point you talked about. Payments architecture. You talked about gateways, merchant acquiring. Clearly, that convergence, I think, between traditional bank rails and the card payment schemes. That's a nice segue into for Eugene, actually. So from a Sony perspective, Eugene, you clearly you're responsible for countries clearly outside of the Middle East and across Africa. So can you talk to me a little bit about I suppose how has technology aided you actually through the pandemic, and how do you see those technological changes supporting you at Sony?
Sure. So, David, that's a very nice question. And basically, like Girish spoke about just now, we shifted from a physical workspace to a virtual workspace. There was work from home. We had to make changes very quickly. So we were already in the process of, identification of BPR kind of activities, where we were identifying routine non-value-add activities with judgmental activities, which required, a human brain to think about. So we were able to move very quickly we accelerated the adoption of technology. So in terms of, if we take banking, more online banking, enabling host-to-host transactions, then implementing of robotic process automations, in some cases, even machine learning. And I think there was a lot of data that was floating all over. So a lot of BI tools that actually helped us to visualize this better. So all in all, from a Sony perspective, what we did was we quickened the pace. We hastened the move from a lot of manual activity to a lot of automation, a lot of value add. Where required, we also went into BPO. Where, like I said, if it's something doesn't add value to the business, if it's a routine activity, better for us not to focus on it, give it to a BPO and focus on the value add. So generally, we focused, about 2 years ago, if you asked me, was I looking at a new office? Yes, I probably was looking at a new office. I was looking at, many tables, many chairs. That went out of the window very quickly. We had to improve our digital infrastructure, so get added capacity, make sure that everybody had good enough internet speeds. We were able to deliver in time. All of this also came with its own set of challenges in terms of a cybercrime. So we've been hit. There've been attempts to hit us with phishing attacks and with all of these other things. So all in all, I think technology has aided us and in fact given us probably a kick on the butt to move towards automation and adoption of technology. But at the same time, we are very, very careful because of the increased risk of cybercrime and the risks that happen, that are associated with moving everything digital.
Eugene, that's helpful, and I can completely understand your perspective. I think if I think back to clearly, technology is very much definitely an enabler, like we talked about, but it does also come with clear risk, particularly from a cyber security perspective. So I'm going to draw interest here. So Martin, reflecting on the themes that obviously Girish and Eugene talked about there. When you think about the other regions around the world, do you see similar themes coming out from when we're talking to clients, and how do you sort of characterize that from a Barclays perspective?
Yeah, thanks, David. And I was furiously, noting down things that Girish and Eugene were saying, because basically stole all my thunder, because that's a lot of the themes and the topics that we see, obviously in the Middle East and Dubai and in the region. But a lot of COVID has been and probably is to a certain extent a very global phenomenon, right? And the reactions have been relatively similar everywhere. And so some of the things that you've experienced and these trends that have been accelerated by it, we're absolutely seeing, here in the UK, where I'm right now, in Europe, but also in the States, right? So let me pick up on a few of those. Automation, digital signatures, right? The things that have been around, right? This drive for efficiency or straight through processing. As Girish saying, right, for a seasoned treasurer, none of that stuff is new, right? Moving to maybe host to host or Swift, or trying to, push up your automation rates and payments and in reconciliation. That's all stuff that's been around for decades. But all of that really, really went on steroids with this whole thing, right? Starting with what we're doing right now, which is, having bandwidth and technology around to actually speak with people, but all the way to, you just cannot afford to do all the manual stuff or have people push paper around, because there may not be someone on the other end of your paper receipt, right? So it has to go digital. All of a sudden, digital signatures really took off. But what I liked, Girish, actually both of you said that, right, is this also came with a pretty sudden shift of the actual business model or the distribution model of many of our clients, right? So what you said totally resonates with me, and I look across our companies, right? So all of a sudden, people are pushing into direct to consumer sales models. People have never done that, right? So within weeks, you have to set up, online infrastructure, right? Shop, sales, websites, servicing that could deal with it, right? I mean, bots for chat or customer service, and that would have been, all of those things, maybe pre-crisis would have probably been major projects in any of our organizations, right? Going in and building these things would have been nice project plans, again, diagrams, 4 months in, 6, whatever, 12, and we'll do a nice and start. And all of a sudden it went poof, and it just happened, right? And that is because the services, the technologies, the partners, right, the gateways, those things are around, and it's coming together. Now, Eugene, you mentioned that fraud obviously is one of those things that we have seen pop up massively as well. And again, technology is partially our solution, but it's also actually common sense, right? So people being people and thinking about what's happening here has probably helped us avoid many pretty massive potential fraud situations where people just on our end, but also with clients' ends or operations or servicing wherever they sit, kind of start thinking about, it's like, this one's odd. Maybe I'll do a check-in. What I see happening, certainly in the UK, certainly in Europe, and also starting really in the US, is if you think about these topics, these broader themes, is a drive for speed. So real-time payments are popping up everywhere, right? Maybe in a combination with these kind of open banking themes, so API-driven, closer to the actual sale. There's just more granularity. If you look at payments overall, there's way more of them, and the average amount is much lower. Which means, to our point earlier about automation being efficient, there's way more traffic that you have to deal with, bigger files, more stuff to reconcile, and the more efficient you are, the better it is. And or turn it around, if you're not efficient, you're going to be basically dead in the water, right? So it's these things I see happening everywhere. And then for treasurers, I mean, clearly, Girish and Eugene are not easily faced with any of this, but it does come with a few new challenges, right? There's higher speed, there's higher velocity, there's more stuff that one has to take care of, potentially also over the weekend when real-time payment schemes open 24/7. So you have to become a bit more involved, I think, about planning what happens with these flows. How do you make sure that your accounts are funded, etc. And I'd be curious, but you guys will have a view on that. But there's also more pressure and demand from your divisions, your sales folks on treasury, right? Why can I not accept 55 different forms of payment at the point of sale on my new internet shop, right? Let's fix it, right? So it's I think the dynamic is a higher velocity, right? So I'll shut up now, but I think it's very interesting.
No, and I'd agree with you, Martin, and I think that ties me in quite nicely actually to the next question. So when we think about the role of the corporate treasurer for the C-suite, for the board, clearly we've at the ACT also, and very much we've seen the role of the treasurer becoming very important, clearly, to the strategic direction of any organisation. So Girish, I'd be interested in your perspective. So when you think about, have you seen a shift in terms of the critical role of the treasurer going forwards for the C-suite and for the board, and also specifically when you think about the shift in culture towards technology being an enabler for your teams? So those two parts. So one, critical role of the treasurer, and secondly, how is technology also enabling you to become a critical function?
Okay, thank you, David. Okay, there are two questions. I'll be very candid about my answer to be helpful to everybody. The role of a treasurer was always very important. But normally the very senior people, they realize the importance only once they get into trouble. Either they get into a liquidity crunch or they end up with a big FX loss. This is when it's very strange, it's a bit out of the topic, around January, February, you can see a lot of treasurers role coming up. And this is the result of the big problem they'll end up in the balance sheet. And that's the thing, it has been there always for the last 10, 15 years, Over my career of, let's say, 35 years, I'm always saying this. But those thinking has slightly changed in the last 2 years, especially this part of the world after the VAT coming in. VAT has, of course, redefined the whole process. Now, just intercompany passing on intercompany loan or pooling is not that simple as what it was 3 years back. So now the implications are there in the tax. So once, as a treasurer, you do your wrong thing, it gets implication on multiple things. So now the thinking, broader perspective is different. From the top, they start thinking, okay, they require a liquidity management policy in place. They need to have a good relationship with the bank. It's not that all the time the board members can directly deal with the bank, so they need to have a proper channel established. So from C-suite, I can see there is a difference in perspective. And coming off this pandemic, of course, that has increased. I would be honest, it has increased because now they understand, you have deadlines to meet. So need to talk to the bank. Even if they're favoring you, they will come up after discussions and other things. So you need to have a channel in place. A normal who's not a specialist in this role, you're not a normal treasurer, a accountant, cannot do the same justice to the job, what a treasurer can do. So that way, it is coming up. I think its priorities are increasing. I'll go to the second portion for the technology. Technology, I always mentioned to you, that is the thing which everybody is looking into now. The simple payment mechanism, what Martin discussed, Earlier, when you used to go to the shop or an online, you just used to swipe a card. But that card itself is now 10, 15 different types actually. Many people will not know there's something called buy now, pay later. These are many innovative schemes coming from US and other places. There are different type of like Chinese cards in place. So a shop or a online site, whatever you have, you need to be enabled with all this 15, 20 different type of function. Well, it was so easy. There's a Visa card, MasterCard, or MX, or Diners, so they're done. But now it's a new space. Now you've got other new technologies coming. So that definitely everybody understands it, because that adds to the bottom line. And again, they talk about customer experience. If a customer comes and he's not able to, use his card, pay, and buy the things from there, your board directors will be after you. So how come we lost the customer? So that's sort of a priority. Again, I think technology is going to take a major share in that.
Great, thank you very much. So Eugene, actually moving across to yourself. So we've heard from Girish the critical role of the treasurer that's always been critical, and clearly technology continuing to change. Clearly the mass adoption of different payment schemes and payment methods. Clearly the shift to e-commerce. It sounds like quite a challenging time to be a treasurer. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you face day to day, and what do you foresee with the challenges in the near term?
Sure, David, thanks. So basically, I think I have to agree with Girish and Martin that the adoption of the digital payment gateway and the mobile payments like NFC or the M-Pesa in Kenya and stuff like that. These are these are things that we have to adopt to and make sure that we're able to kind of allow the business to use them to operate. So for me, the biggest challenge we face is keeping pace with the demands of the business. So the way the consumer transacts at the shop front has changed a great deal. Earlier, like Girish said, you would come with cash most times in our markets. Now they've come out with some cards and now customers want to pay by phone. So, I mean, the technology is emerging. One thing which really interests me now is like Tesla went in and said, we'll accept Bitcoins. So, how does a treasurer start dealing with those kind of, payment methods and mechanisms? So that's something else that's very interesting. So, but otherwise, I think it's quite basic, in terms of, we've got to keep doing the things we do, like liquidity management, making sure that, we have enough funds, we have the right funds at the right place, making sure that, where the business requires, we've been able to support them. And one thing that comes to my mind very specifically is risk management. I can't talk enough about it because of the region that we operate in. So the regions that we operate in, I keep telling my colleagues from the other Sony companies that, I think out of the 7 or 8 countries which are under sanctions, we have 5 or 6 of them. Most of them are in our part of the world. So we've got to be very cognizant of that fact of, identifying, analyzing our risks, having a risk management policy in place, making sure that we do our business ethically, and having the right kind of risk management strategies in place. So generally, I think adopting new technologies or newer technologies and newer methods of payment, at the same time not forgetting to do our basics right, is kind of the kind of challenges that we face, and I think that's something that we need to address on an ongoing day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you very much, and I'm not surprised to hear you say that actually. So, the core role of a treasurer. Let's think back to basic principles of security, control, liquidity management. All core basics that any treasurer, as you rightly said, need to keep at the forefront of their mind. The interesting point, though, of course, is I think the point that you raised was around then how do you also then enable the business to enable their underlying B2C flows. I think also specifically on how you see the innovation agenda coming for your business partners, because I think one of the other critical points, and Girish referenced this also earlier, partnering with the business functions to understand their needs and adapting with the business models as the underlying clients change is also really important. But you're right, the core fundamentals of a treasurer never will change, actually, thinking about it. So I guess from our perspective, as Barclays, we think about clearly from a risk management perspective. Clearly, as you said, a couple of the points we should bring to everyone's attention. Clearly, the first one, good control and security, so the right relevant controls in place, the relevant fraud protection measures, good cybersecurity awareness, all good core things to any corporate client that should be thinking about how they're operating within their treasury function and educating their teams. Clearly, as we also talked about earlier, clearly risk management is again critical to a treasurer's role. So the exposure to foreign exchange markets, to the debt and equity capital markets, these are all things that you're clearly as experienced treasurers, you're very used to dealing with. COVID's just presented a number of other different types of challenges, more in the ways in which we operate as businesses, needing to work from home, not being in the office, continuing that element of collaboration and making sure that we keep our teams engaged and motivated. Now, luckily, if I was having that conversation 18 months ago, I probably couldn't have seen a sort of phasing out. Now, luckily, sitting here again, back in Canary Wharf, I'm quite pleased to be back in the office and being able to collaborate with my teams again. So again, I think there's an interesting story as it relates to risk management, and I think that's one of the things that the pandemic taught us, is that the basic core principles which we apply in our everyday role still continued throughout the pandemic. They were just slightly heightened in most cases, particularly around operational control. So Martin, I'm going to come back to you actually, and just thinking back on that reflection on risk management. So data is one thing we haven't actually touched on today, interestingly. So how do you see data management evolving as a key priority for treasurers, and also specifically from Barclays' perspective, and how we can make data actually a core strategic advantage?
That's both easy and hard to answer, right? Easy because we could go and use all the catchphrase, right? Data is the new oil or the new gold or whatnot, and that's all cool, right? And we have all seen, data, making use of data, how that is applied and what that can drive, right? Again, right, it's not a new concept, but there is way more data, and a lot of it is unstructured, and just reflecting about ourselves, and also some of the discussions I keep having with corporate treasurers or in general people in our businesses. The data is there. Getting it out of where it is into a form that's useful, and then gleaning insights from it is actually quite hard, right? So and some people have done a lot of cool things around it, and so have we, right? So there's lots of things you can do, but you always have to also keep in mind what is sort of okay to do with people's data, right? Data is also quite sensitive topic. So it's like a bit of a fine line. On top of that, I'm sure most of you can relay, right? It is a bit potentially makes one nervous what some of these companies ourselves know about us, and then if they use this aggressively, that can also turn into a bit of a freak out moment. But talking about treasury, and I say that because we've had a few conversations with companies. Obviously, we are doing some work on making sense of, for example, payments data that we have, right? But we also want to make sure that we we are sensitive about data that we know or have about certain industries, right? So I'm pretty sure that, just picking on Eugene here for a moment, that a few of your competitors would be quite happy to understand what Sony's doing where, but we equally are the guardians of that data. We should be quite happy not to tell them, right? So you have to be careful with normalized, this industry does this industry does that, because in some markets there's not that much around, right? So it would be very easy to find that this is, for example, Sony, right? So just being careful around it and cautious. Having said that, there's a lot of cool stuff one can do, right? And again, the foundational work that is happening at the moment is getting data in a form and in a structure that one can start actually using it, right? So for most of our corporate clients, you would be using some sort of ERP system or treasury workstation or something, right? So getting data in with good quality for payments, for account statements, etc., from whatever point of sale technology, maybe even enrich it with certain information that sits in your own systems, and then working across your group of banks or finance partners, wherever it may be, is super interesting, right? Understanding your clients deeper, coming into this mode where you can maybe suggest the next big thing, like some of these retail companies have perfected, right? Amazon always tells me what I want to buy before I know it. Often I do it too, but that's a different story. But that's interesting. And if I turn that around, for us, it's also super interesting to be able to go and actually help our clients with basic things like Speaking in real life example, you have several subsidiaries, you end up paying the same vendor 15 different times during the day through 4 different payment methods because your subsidiaries are doing that stuff, right? That's not, it's not problematic, but you could certainly save some money and probably take this information and have a good conversation with your vendor, or maybe use it to do terms or other things, right? So the final thought on that, one of the final thoughts, you are probably aware that there's a lot going on in the international payments world, correspondent banking, with this payment central infrastructure replacement, or the ISO program, like the language of international payments. I'm actually quite excited about that. Not about all the work that has to happen with all the the bank's infrastructure, the clearing systems, and ultimately our clients, right? That's quite all encompassing, but it's way more structured, much richer data for international payments that you can actually, do way more stuff with, even starting with simple things like using GPI payment tracking, right? So that, if you do the cross-border payments, you can actually go online and see what the status is, has it appeared, etc. So taking a lot of those difficult, manual, unknown situations out of it. But once we're there, I think you'll see plenty more applicabilities, whether it's in your systems or from us banks as partners and service providers to come to you and say, hey, this is what we can glean, or these are the things that we could provide as insights for you or across the market.
Great, thank you, Martin. No, that's definitely, I agree that that transition to ISO is going to be one of the core themes we're going to be talking to treasurers about, definitely for years to come, I think, as that transition takes place and the enrichment of data. So coming back, I guess, to listening to all of the themes we've touched on already during this panel, Girish, I'll just ask you one key question. If you look at your near to medium term priorities, how would you summarize or categorize those for the audience?
My immediate priority is, like I mentioned to you, the technological advancement. Now, I'm just speaking on what Martin was talking about, the payment systems and other things. But I would be also expecting the banks also to come out with a lot of innovative material. I think the normal delivery channels or the whole source system, what we used to have before, or 2 years, 3 years back, I think that's going to change now. So immediate, my challenge is I'm going to expect much more technological advancement. Also, with a lot of fintech companies coming in, I've been approached by 10, 15 different fintechs, the ideas which used to come from the bank. So these fintech companies are developing. So obviously, when a lot of competition comes in, so I can see there could be some more advancement coming in the way we do our existing operational work. So my immediate challenge in next 1 year is technologically upgrade our own internal mechanisms or internal human power. So that we are ready for that stage in next 1 year time. We are ready for that. Otherwise, you'll be away from the market, and we'll be very, very outdated.
Great, thank you. That's interesting. One topic we haven't touched on actually, but I completely agree with your ability to connect with fintechs and particularly to collaborate from an open banking or open source perspective is going to be particularly critical, I think, as business models continue to evolve. So Eugene, probably coming across to you actually, reflecting on Girish's comments, if you were reflecting or talking to your team today about your near-term priorities, what do you see those as being?
I think, David, if I have to list my top 3 priorities, for the coming year, I'd want to increase the level of process automation. Like I've tasted the fruit already, and now I think it's time for me I want more. So that's the first thing I'd like to do. And like Girish said, I'd seek out, very innovative fintech solutions to cater to the need for data, which will aid decision-making based on facts. So being a Japanese company, we believe in a lot of data analysis. I mean, believe me, Excel is my middle name. So we need to come out with, how to link different levels of data. Like Martin said, we have data coming from our business partners at the shop front. We have a lot of different data. So how do we put it all together, and what story does it tell us, based on which I can take a decision which helps the business. And finally, I'd like to, focus on value add by increasing automation and having better ways to process my data, focus on the value add to the business in terms of finding innovative solutions to their needs, like we talked about, their funding needs in different countries and also different payment gateways and things like that. So these will be my top 3 priorities in the near term.
Great, thank you. And similarly, none of those are a surprise, probably to me, given the level of need for data automation, technology change. So I'm going to ask, probably come to Martin actually for the final question actually. So Martin, given what you've heard from Girish and Eugene earlier, clearly it's a world of change we're seeing. We're seeing new payments architecture. We're seeing new. Oh, Girish, it looks like you've got one thing to add actually. So
yeah, No, I just wanted to add, it will be different than you would be expecting. The treasurer will say, my immediate thinking is I need to arrange for some funding, and we need to adjust the FX. Those days are over now. So we are in a different world.
I'm pleased to hear that. So that's good. Thank you. So Martin, I guess from your pleasure to hear that from Girish anyway, at least. So, but coming back to the other points, I think so. If you think about how can banks really respond to that growing need for real time, you think about payments architecture change, regulatory change, the need for data. How can we ensure that as a banking industry we make sure that those services are provided really to clients and that we stay apace with this changing landscape?
I think there's kind of three angles to it. One, and we all touch about, is technology, right? There, yes, we need to continue to invest pretty chunky amounts in technology, making sure stuff works, etc. Right? By the way, Girish, I cannot. I don't know what happened, but as a digital bank, I'm not mentioning API and cloud. I'm a bit shocked, but obviously API is a channel, an important channel of the future, right? I still think host to host and these things will be around for things that have time, but things that are urgent, there's going to be more and more of that. There will be an API call. You get information, you do the payment, bam, 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 right? So being able to integrate and expose this technology in a way that is easily digestible for corporate clients directly or for your system providers is super important for the future, right? So that's just the one answer, right? We have to really be apace and be more agile and deliver this technology to ourselves, and then obviously give that to our clients in an easily digestible way, which brings me maybe to the second part, which is cooperation. We will not be able to build everything ourselves. As much as it pains a seasoned banker to say that, right? It's just too quick. The market, the demand, everything is moving way quicker than our 5-year payment system replacement programs can cope, right? So you have to go and accept the fact that there is technology partners or fintechs or other gateways, like we talked about, that you have to rely on and pick the right partners to do something together, so you can increase this speed to market and build just better products, right? Or increase your reach, right? For me, that's absolutely clear. And thirdly, actually, we touched upon that pretty much at the beginning, right? But with all this digital technology automation happening, it's super important. There still is a very important human element in this as well, right? So the communications, Girish, you said that. It's actually interesting, almost funny, right? But because of COVID and us sitting at home, we actually had probably to a certain extent more communication through a quick Zoom call or other things, and probably removed some of these barriers of formality of going somewhere, etc. Right? So for me, it's a bit about retaining that human element, making sure on the other hand that all the stuff that are not value adding, and Eugene, I love that, right? It has to be this value creation, right? Calling the bank to cancel a check is not value creation, right? You want to do that in a quick app or something else, right? That's automation. That needs to be super simple. A bot can do that, right? But having the conversation with one of your bankers about strategic things or funding options or whatever it is, or things that really help, or how do we really go and do this new storefront? How do we integrate the API? That's where you want to probably have a real face-to-face meeting, a brainstorming, a co-creation topic, right? So for me, it's around these three themes: so the technology, partnership, and also kind of still coming together with the human element. So I see that, and boy, yeah, there's a lot going on at the moment, right? It's not going to be boring in treasury or with the banks that are servicing you.
Great, thank you very much, Martin. So interesting. I'm going to come back to there's actually a question been posed actually on the Q&A. So just to remind everybody, if you want to ask a question, please go forward on the Q&A. So actually, Eugene, this is actually pointed to you actually as a question first of all. So one thing we haven't touched on today is around the centralization of treasuries. Now, given clearly you operate in multi markets, How actually have you found, by operating multi-countries, how have you adapted your treasury function? How have you decided around centralization and or decentralization of the treasury function? So what have been those core considerations you've thought about as the Sony group? And also specifically in the future, what are the certain elements of decentralization that you expect to continue?
Well, basically, David, the core functions such as the managing the risk, the hedging, and all of these make more sense when it's centralized. So within Sony, we have a global treasury which takes care of cash pooling, which takes care of the hedging needs of all the different Sony entities, and that kind of is what we have centralized. And what is decentralized is basically the relationship management at each level, because at each country level there is a certain amount of interaction that you need with the bankers. Each rules and regulations differ, so it's left to each of these countries that we operate in to kind of set their own banking relationships and to work with them. So if you ask me, I think the important cash pooling and things like hedging is centralized, and decentralization is basically going to be a lot of relationship management and on the ground effort and work that's there.
That's great. No, that's helpful. Thank you very much. And Girish, just a question for yourself, actually. So you talked a lot about the ability to partner with fintechs very much today. So how well informed do you think, and how well do you stay connected with the fintech community? And how do you think banks can enable you to be better connected, actually, when you're thinking about how you run treasury?
I can give an example, a quick example. Earlier, when we used to talk to the bankers, when the bankers used to approach us for normal SCF, it was very simple, So the first question I used to ask, what's the advantage for us? No, it's only the advantage for the banks. You lend your money, you make the money. For me, other than that, extension of my credit period, I'm not getting anything. There was this fintech company who approached me. So we have got this system, we'll give you a multiple channel. Where if you want, you can ask the banks to fund it, or if you have got surplus cash, you can put it. You can vary your credit terms. So now it made it very, very innovative. So these are the sort of ideas that come from fintech. You obviously Barclays, who you to get this stuff, you will have internally 5 different boards approving it. And by the time you approve it, a small fintech company would have already developed it. So that's the major difference.
Great, thank you. No, that's very helpful. Thinking about so from a fintech perspective. So I'm actually seeing if there's any other questions coming up on the app. There aren't at the moment. So what I'm probably going to do is just quickly summarize, I think, just all of the points we've touched on today. So we've gone through a number of themes. Clearly, technology has been the thread, I think, that's gone through all of this conversation. We've talked a little bit about pre versus post COVID changing the role of a treasurer. It sounds like actually the role of the treasurer hasn't fundamentally changed. It's just evolving, the best way I'd describe it. So it's
Absolutely.
Evolving to the needs of the businesses. It's evolving to the needs of the technological change. And it's also just realizing that actually the core fundamentals of a treasury are really always going to be there. So control, security, giving comfort to the board, giving strategic direction, being part of those conversations are really going to be critical and into the short term. I like to have Martin Fraser actually though towards the end, his the 3 priorities: technology, partnering and collaboration. One of the things we've all learned, I think, from COVID is that collaborating, whether it's digitally, in person, bringing our teams together, whether it's collaborating with external partners, the open banking market, you can continue to see these types of skills will be particularly important really for bankers and treasurers alike, I think. So it's interesting, although we've touched on very much on what have been the changing priorities for global and regional treasurers, they're not really that stark. These are things that are very personal, and we're seeing them in our day-to-day lives, even pre-pandemic, and also now clearly post-pandemic. So I firstly just wanted to say a huge thank you to Girish, to Eugene, to Martin. Thank you all for taking the time today. Now, of course, this brings us to the end of the first day of the ACT conference for the UAE, and to thank everybody for all of the panel sessions that have taken part today, and obviously look forward to clearly the day tomorrow. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.